there. But in the meantime, I just wanted to invite up to the stage, firstly, the Honourable Agnes Makonda Ridley, the Minister of Education for Malawi. So a hand of, there's not many of you here, so make a noise. And then Marsha Davidson, Room to Read, USAID's work in Africa. And then Vongai Nyunvi, Chief Network Officer and Head of Africa Region at Teach for All. Please sit where you choose. We're going to be very flexible and agile this afternoon. So ideally what we're going to do is hear from Mr. Nobuhiro Kaneda, the Senior Advisor for Basic Education at the Japan International Cooperation Agency. I'm not sure whether he is online or has a pre-record message for us at this stage. So in the interest of time, I think what I'm going to do is just start with the panel we have, who've been kind enough to give their time here. So why don't we just jump in? I'm going to come and sit down here. So let me pose to the three of you here, and I'll let you choose how you'd like to respond. But the first question I would have is, what do countries need to do to move from the assessment of learning to assessment for learning? And can you give some practical examples of assessment for learning? So maybe Marsha, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I think, and I've thought a lot about this question. I was asked this a few days ago, and it was a great question to ask. And I wanted to start with sort of three assumptions or three issues that I think are really important when you move from assessment of learning, which we've talked a lot about in the last few days, to assessment for learning. The first issue has to do with teacher expectations. So one of the most important aspects of moving in the direction of assessment for learning is taking a look at what teachers are expected to do in their classrooms currently in the countries in which you work. And many times teachers are asked to cover curriculum. There is a set pace that they're supposed to cover, and the issue for them around evaluation is how much of the curriculum can they cover by the end of the year, not what are children learning from the curriculum. And the other part of that is that the curriculum is often very ambitious and full of many different components that make it difficult to focus on the foundational skills that are so essential for children to move through that curriculum successfully. So I think that's one of the issues that we have to think about when we think about moving in the direction of assessment for learning. The second one has to do with teacher beliefs and that shift from teachers not confident that the children, that they're, well, not necessarily confident that their role is as being responsible for children learning, that their role is to teach the curriculum and the children are responsible for learning or making the choice of learning or not learning. And when you make this shift in teacher beliefs that they are empowered to be responsible for children's learning, it really changes dramatically the role that the teacher assumes in the classroom. It's a very different kind of role. And then the third is what kinds of practical examples are possible. If I'm responsible for my children learning, how do I do that? I'm used to giving tests. I mean, and this is not the Teach 4 Days test on Friday. This is looking at every day in the moment of teaching, during the teaching, as you're teaching a skill, how do you assess for learning? And I'll just give you some practical examples that I have seen in many of the countries in which I've worked that I find to be really helpful and powerful. These will be very simple to you, but believe me, they're not simple to learn because it's a dramatic shift in the role of teaching, the pedagogical perspective in teaching, and it requires a lot of support and encouragement. But one of the examples I want to share has to do with how you call on children in the classroom. And this is an assessment for learning. We have sort of a mantra in all the countries that I've worked in, had the privilege of working, that where teachers don't have the children raise their hands. They do not raise hands in the class, but the teacher walks among children and selects children that may not have been willing to raise their hands. Now, some of you might think, well, isn't that going to embarrass the child, make them feel uncomfortable? You go by that child, you stand there, and you ask a question. And for an English example might be, this is what we learned today, so tell me the first sound you hear in cat. What's the first sound you hear in cat? And a child might say, see? Or they might just say, I don't know. You stand there next to that child and you say, cat. The first sound I hear in cat is k, k. Say it with me. The first sound we hear in cat is k. Now I'm going to ask you again. Same question. What's the first sound you hear in cat? And the child says, k, and then the whole class claps. You do not ask a question to a child and leave that child without the right answer. You leave that child when they have the right answer and they're supported for the right answer. But you know that that child isn't certain about that beginning sound. So that's something from a teaching perspective that gives you information from that brief assessment encounter. But you're always calling on children without their hands raised. If I only called on the children with their hands raised, I would be just reinforcing my success as a teacher with those few children, and I wouldn't have any idea in the rest of the class how children are doing. Another simple way to do assessment for instruction is thumbs up. You ask a question and say, do you think that the last sound we hear in dog is g? Is that right? Thumbs up if you think that's right. Or if I have 2 sticks and I put 2 more together, does that make 4 sticks? Who thinks it's 4 sticks? Thumbs up. Now, you can look around the room really quickly and see who put their thumb up right away and who looked around to see what everybody else did. And you watch for the children who hesitated in their answer, and those are the children you're going to want to go back to because they're going to make sure they're right by looking at everybody else. So thumbs up one. Another one that I found really valuable, once children start learning to actually read words and decode, and then even to the point where they're reading sentences and paragraphs, is checking through writing and spelling and dictation. So in one of the programs I worked in, almost every day in their exercise books, after a lesson was taught, the teacher would say, okay, let's see, we just learned how to spell this word. Say, it's house. We just learned the OU diphthong. So we are going to spell it. We learned how to spell it together as a class. So everybody open your exercise books and write house. And the teacher walks around. Who's able to write house correctly? But you don't collect the exercise books and grade them afterwards. You answer that question. You spell house. You have someone come up and spell it correctly on the board. Then ask the children to fix their exercise books if they didn't have the same word that they see on the board. So you always, in teaching, when you're really embedding that assessment in your instruction, you're providing the feedback the children need right away on the spot, and then making sure when that lesson is finished that they have the right answer. It's kind of like if you're asking a class a question and you go around, if the first child's incorrect, I've seen teachers just answer this, you, no, you, and you. And finally it's right, but guess what? The children remembered the first one. They didn't remember the last one that was correct. They remembered the incorrect one. So it's really, really a good idea for teachers to get in the habit of always giving the right answer right away and making sure all the children feel successful from every teaching moment. So those examples seem very simple, but they're really a shift in teachers' beliefs about their role and how they can engage students in productive, positive instruction and learning. I think it's really important to remember that assessment for learning is not just tests. Assessment for learning is the way in which you engage children in the process of understanding and learning the skill that you're teaching and making sure they get it so that they will continue to be successful. So that's just embedded in a good core curriculum. But if a teacher's doing this kind of instruction where he or she may have to stop and work with a child or make sure those children get that skill because of the way I taught it wasn't working, I need to reteach this. That means that if those expectations are that you need to be on this lesson on this day and you need to finish this much of the curriculum, it's not going to happen. If you are teaching and assessing for instruction and sort of guiding your instruction by the response you're getting from your students, you're not going to go at the pace that might be prescribed by your supervisors. So then it means that there has to be at that top level, at the school level, at the district, the regional, national level, there has to be some adjustment and flexibility in how that curriculum is covered, because it's the core fundamental skills that children must learn. We've had too many times where we have an intervention after several years, half the children don't know the letter sounds yet. So we're missing those core skills so that the system level, they need to know what those foundational skills are that are most important to teach, allow teachers the time to make sure all children get those skills, and then they can be reconnected back to that very ambitious curriculum that's part of the country's goals for all children in learning. That's my answer to the question.
Thank you so much, Marsha, and it's fabulous to hear the detail and the practical solutions as well. I wish my classroom experience had been more like that. That's for sure. I think that Mr. Kaneda is with us online. Am I right? I think I saw him on the screen, Mr. Kaneda. He was.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kaneda. I'll hand over to you now to give your intervention.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, let me have a few seconds to show my slides. Do you see the cover page?
Yep, we can see them.
Okay, thank you very much. So, good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to, I'm very happy to share with you our evidence-backed practices to ensure foundational learning, literacy, and numeracy through community-wide collaboration in Africa. I'm Nobuhiro Kunieda, Senior Advisor for Basic Education, Japan International Cooperation Agency. Well, having participated in the previous session, I'm feeling that my presentation might better fit into the previous session. But anyway, I'll share with you some elements of my presentation. The girl in the photo, grade 4, was mobilizing all the fingers to solve a grade 1 math problem, as you can see. So almost 90% of the primary age children in sub-Saharan Africa were not achieving minimum proficiency level. So the learning crisis existed even before COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know. And so to tackle the learning crisis in Africa, JICA has been working with several education ministries through the School for All program. So since its launch in Niger 2004, The program has covered more than 70,000 primary schools, primary and junior high schools in Africa. And progress and priority vary between the country projects, but all started with a foundational model or developing a foundational model for enhanced school management through community-wide collaboration or community participation, which is adapted to each country's context. This slide shows the impact on basic reading for more than 640,000 children of Madagascar. As a result of a 3-month intervention, the proportion of learners who could read increased by 33%. So this is on the upper right-hand side, you can see the assessment tool in the language Malagasy. This is the result in mathematics for more than 820,000 children of Niger. Thanks to a less than 3-month intervention, the project contributed to raising the proportion of learners who could do math operations by 25% points. So this is also a math assessment tool, simple tool. Our School for All program places the well-functioning SMC in the center of all community-based initiatives. For this to happen, our model, foundational model, trains school-level actors in the following 3 areas. 1, democratic establishment of SMC. 2, participatory self-supporting planning and management. 3, SMC networking for enhanced communication. Once democratically established SMC well functioning, they serve as foundations for addressing specific issues such as foundational learning. Sorry. Now let us see how the extended model for foundational learning, what we call PMAC, works. So this cycle starts with rapid learning assessment with simple tools, as shown earlier. Then the SMC members share the assessment results with parents, teachers, community members. Realizing the learning crisis at their own school, the participants, like the parents, community members, they will discuss possible solutions to formulate the school management committee or SMC action plan. Once the plan is adopted, the entire school community organizes remedial activities at the right level based on the assessment results. In the previous session, we also learned from participants about teaching at the right level approach, TAR. So at the end, after the remedial activities, the rapid assessment again is conducted to see the learning progress, which motivates local stakeholders to continue making efforts. This is also the key to the sustainable mechanism. Well, even if learning assessment informs local stakeholders of the learning crisis, we believe that it doesn't automatically lead to relevant solutions. So the School for All program suggests a community-friendly framework. With SMC's facilitation, the local stakeholders discuss step by step the 3 major factors of quality learning, namely engaged learning time, learning materials, and quality of learning support. So they will discuss step by step so that they can come up with a concrete action plan integrating community-supported remedial activities, backed up with effective materials, teaching learning materials, and supported by volunteer facilitators, including teachers and volunteers, community volunteers. So these are all community-supported activities from various countries. So, well, this is just to emphasize that our program has been providing evidence-backed solutions. A variety of community-supported activities. So, in conclusion, our School for All program provides effective, scalable, and evidence-backed solutions to the learning crisis. And community-supported assessment-based remedial activities play a crucial role in ensuring foundational learning. The foundational model provides institutional foundations for making learning improvement sustainable and scalable through community-wide collaboration or community participation. Lastly and not least, I would like to thank the ADEA team for allowing me to participate in this important session and also to celebrate my half-century-old birthday today by chance on this memorable occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaneda, and a very happy birthday as well. I'm not far behind you, just for transparency. I'll turn now to Minister Makonda and let you respond to what you've heard both from Marsha and Mr. Kaneda, and then I'll move along and see how much time we have left. I'm under very strict orders to finish by 6:30, so everyone can go for drinks and food, etc. So, Minister.
Thank you very much, and let me thank my fellow panelists, both here and virtually from Japan. The question of how we assess whether or even what our children are learning or whether they're learning and so on, I think has to be linked at this moment in time very much to the whole discussion of transforming education. This morning we heard when I think it's the minister from Uganda responsible for STISA spoke about how we ought to tear the whole fabric of what education has been and start again. I want to go to that point and start there because the very fact that we're talking about transforming education suggests that we will at some point also have to look at what needs to change in how we assess the learning that our children are getting. In that sense, I want to take it to the bigger picture because as a policymaker, it is my job to create conditions in which the tools that we've had shared by our expert panelist, to create conditions for those tools to be able to work. Because my belief is that if I look back, say, into the Ministry of Education in Malawi, and I do have some of the directors from my ministry sitting in this room just now, we have competent people who are able to do things. Often I ask myself, why is it that knowing what they know and knowing what the country needs, that which we need as a country we're not getting? What is happening in their world? That's part of the question that I have to ask myself and to see whether or not in the path of those that are tasked to do the operational tasks that we're talking about, there are obstacles that are bigger than their stage they're too big for them to remove, which then must be my job, removing those obstacles. What could they be? For part of the answer, I want to look at the study that has left all of us wondering, what has it all been about in the past 50 years or so? If our children, only 10% of 10-year-olds are able to read with comprehension a simple text. And we're now being told, and I said more or less the same earlier on, that surely COVID was not what caused the loss of learning, not that magnitude of loss. These things existed long before COVID came. So then we have assessments. Was assessment not there? What was assessment assessing? These are the questions that I think we need to address ourselves to, because I'm not an expert in the area of assessment. What I'm an expert in is looking at people working and working out what is it they're supposed to do and what is it they're supposed to deliver and how best can they deliver, what is standing in their way. Can I remove the obstacles and then watch them work and stand behind, push those that are slugging and gently direct, but very much with an eye on the goal. Where are we going? So the education, who are we educating? for Malawi and for Africa, I would say we're wanting to educate every child, all the children with special education needs, or the children from poor backgrounds, mostly rural areas, that are mostly left out, and everybody else who we've already been managing to reach. When we talk about children with special education needs, we're already talking about assessment that has to be different. So has assessment that has been happening been geared to what has been being taught, which is what you were talking about, I think. We need to look at what are we trying to do, and are we measuring what we're trying to do, or are we measuring something different? Or indeed, do we have the right tools, but we don't have the people? As the case is a little in Malawi, where our standards department needs strengthening significantly because we do not have all the inspectors we need, even if they were using the wrong tools. If we judge by the 10%, 10-year-olds, only 10% being able to read, which suggests that only 10% maybe are learning anything meaningful from our system. But I prefer to look at the system, mentioning the word system, because if assessors were assessing the wrong thing, where was the part of the system that's meant to take the temperature of what's happening in assessment? What was it doing at the time? So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is when we're looking at assessment, one, we have to make sure we're putting it in the context. Some things will be common across countries, across Africa, maybe across the globe even, but many things will be context specific. And then we also have to look at, we should not fall into the trap of isolating a part of a system no more than we can isolate a part of the body and go all the way to identify what has not been working, why it has not been working, when we know that this arm is part of this body. If this arm is not functioning, there might be something somewhere causing it not to function. So before we start excising the arm and or amputating or whatever vicious measures we might take, we need to look at the whole system, which again brings us back to the context, and see what have we been doing wrong. And it's very tempting, given that we're talking 10% across sub-Saharan Africa, to conclude that something we've all been doing has been terribly wrong. Whatever it is, we need evidence for that. And I'm sure maybe there is evidence already, but for some of us, we feel there's still a few questions to be asked. So for our number crunchers, the researchers, the ones who study practice, because if I speak just for Malawi, I know that for a number of years now, education-focused research has been dormant. When I came into this role 2 years ago, I was shocked to find that as minister, expected to almost operate blind. It's a huge ministry with huge responsibility. You're wanting the country to follow where your inclination takes you, on a very serious issue. Children are growing up, and they'll be growing up with policies that I've pronounced as minister, I can pronounce because that's my job, but on a wing and a prayer. That is very scary. So I think in this question as well, where was assessment when the 90% were escaping our education systems without learning much? Were they there? Or was it the system? What was happening exactly? Because it is my belief that the inputs you've made and the inputs, Mr. Doctor, I've picked up the name, our expert panelist has put in, those things we, I think, are able to do. But there must be bigger obstacles that are stopping us. What are they? That's what we need to know. I think I should stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Makonda. And I think it's interesting you raised the speech earlier from the Ugandan minister as well, because I think there's a great point there as we all talk about transforming education systems, and there's a danger in transforming a broken system if we don't first look at what's the purpose of the system. So I think that's a theme coming out of here as well. But I'm going to now turn in the interests of time to Vongai and let you
on anything you'd like. So you
Yes.
respond, you make your own points.
Lovely. So I'm just going to start by sharing a story that emphasizes assessment for learning. So there was this young girl that I'm just going to call Mary for the purpose of this conversation. She was from Nigeria and she went to England to do a master's in sociology. So one day she was in a class, the teacher asked, "Can you tell me what does sociology mean?" She confidently put her hand up and described textbook definition of what sociology means in general in terms of a definition. And then when the teacher asked again, like, "What does that mean for you?" She then went mute because for her, she had really claimed what sociology means. And then she realized that her fellow peers around her started interpreting sociology from their day-to-day realities. For her, it was quite confusing because she had been a first-class student from like the foundational years until she finished a first-class degree. And the reason why I'm sharing this is that there are so many Marys out there that sometimes our current education system is preparing us, in particular in Africa, to really comply, like from how we are assessed. Like, I remember I grew up in Zimbabwe. I was born, bred, raised in Zimbabwe. I was a straight A student, but I remember when I went into my first job and I was asked to draft a letter, I struggled with some elements of it because I could not think critically, but I had been so good, quote unquote, at what I was doing. And the reason why I'm sharing all these things is, right now, if we look at our current systems, I know some people in this room might think we need this tool and that tool. While there's a place for those tools to be used, I think the question that we need to ask ourselves, I think from the session this morning, is what is the purpose of education in our context, right? I think there's a famous person who said before, if you have got 60 minutes to solve a problem in which your life depends on it, spend 55 minutes asking the right questions. I think sometimes we really rush quickly to say, what tools do we need? What data pieces do we need? But just going back to the basic around exactly in our context. You know, some people talked about education becoming a liberating tool. Some people talked about education becoming that thing that will lift us out from poverty and everything else in between. So as we think through that, I think one of the things, if I was to almost give advice to governments, I would almost start by saying, rather than, you know, those people who come from those African places where we eat intestines, you know, sometimes when you have to remove mess, you have to really start from the end and make sure you're removing the dirt. And sometimes if you start in the middle, same with Colgate, you have to really make sure you're starting from the bottom. But what I've just been hearing in some space is we are just rushing to think about what tools, what techniques, how do we need to assess. But if we look across the value chain, how are our teachers being recruited, right? If we start from that end, I think there's a story that some of you might know that in Ogun, in Kaduna State in Nigeria, when the new governor came, he gave a standard 3 exam to 25,000 teachers who taught standard 3. And out of those, 23,000 failed. And these are the people that are recruiting our students, that are teaching our students, and that are assessing our students, right? I'm not saying it's the same everywhere. I'm just giving this a story, and I'm telling it on behalf of a friend, so don't... Yeah, so, and the reason why is when we, like we see the caliber that's going, we expect them to teach our children critical skills, not to claim, but for them themselves, the way they've been recruited, the way they receive their pre-service training, almost being taught around, you comply, you do this. Of course, when they go into the classroom, they will do what they've always been told because they are a product of their environment. And in addition to that, there are also some things I feel sorry for teachers because recently in my work, I've been privileged to visit different African schools. And this teacher told me that, Wangai, yes, you're telling us to push our kids to do this and that. But when the commissioner and the quality assurance people come, if they see me today and I was supposed to have taught this part of the curriculum 1 month ago, I'll be in trouble. And I'll be in trouble with my head teacher because I am not following the curriculum. So this whole issue around, are my kids learning? Are my kids not learning? It becomes a challenge. And right through to how kids are examined, right? At the end of that process, I might think like I want my kids to know everything that is about how does a butterfly grow or whatever, but I'm not trying to check for understanding. So the earlier question was the difference between summative and formative. those who teach and assess for kids to learn will really slow down sometimes, will become creative. I think sometimes the last few points is I get nervous when I hear people saying our teaching education has to be creative and innovative. But it's almost sometimes when you put a square plug in a round hole, you really struggle to think about how come things are not. And there have been so many efforts, so much funding that has gone into this sector. So until, in my world of work, we call it collective leadership because there are different parts. Government will have a role to play around what policies do we have. Because of course, I'm sitting next to my honorable here and others who are really pushing for shifts. But when you look at the policies, they are the same. They are talking about, yes, the emphasis is on this part of the curriculum. And then when you go to those schools, the teachers are, some of them are keen, some of them are not. But then when you look at teachers' colleges, I was in Ogun State in Nigeria, and now they are saying, how do we rethink how we are training teachers? And how do we professionalize this occupation such that we attract some of the best of the best? So anyway, I might not, there's so many ideas around tools and techniques we can do, but the angle I wanted to come from is around, there's so much that we need to do. Otherwise, we are putting a plaster, we are treating the symptoms, but not addressing the root cause. And we really wonder, but how come, and let's clothe it however we like it. Someone can say Africa, if you throw a stone in Africa, it will hit a professor or a doctor in some places, not everywhere. Because we love education, but are we learning for understanding, or are we being taught how to learn and learn for ourselves? I said I grew up in Zimbabwe, but I live in England because I've got 3 boys, a mother of 3 boys. Sometimes the way my kids question me, for me, I'll be thinking, I can't, because I'm also a product of my environment. I was used to this facility around, if an elder or a teacher or someone else tell you what to do, as a child, you do not have power, and I've got these kids who are being taught another mindset. So one thing that I just want us to challenge us, as Africans and beyond in this room, is about how really are we defining education for learning, and how are we assessing, and everybody, be it you're a teacher. If I had time, I would give examples from our line of work around how people are taking responsibility, because it's one thing to just highlight the problem, but there are so many practical examples. Maybe I'll take 1 minute and speak fast. Like how people, fellows, we call fellows in my world. I'm working for a global organization called Teach for All, which is in 60+ countries in the world, and we have seen some of our fellows really work with all parts of the systems, from parents to, teachers, school leaders, right through to governments, to rethink this thing around how do we create environments in our classrooms where children thrive. So from when we do our pre-service institute, the issue around mindsets is hammered, because we always ensure that a fellow goes in the classroom being obsessed with this idea around how do I ensure that I prepare my kids to learn, I prepare my kids to have critical skills, etc., etc. And of course, also elements around how do I give same attention to emotional and well-being issues that I give to the issues around numeracy and literacy. Because again, kids could excel in that, but unless they're operating from a good place of emotional stability, unless they're operating from a position where they can trust their teacher, everything else that we do kind of comes to fall. I'm just going to pause there because I could talk forever. Thank you, back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and sadly we are out of time. I am going to just quickly ask Alice, who from Better Purpose, who's been taking a few notes here, just to summarize very quickly the discussion. I'm sorry we can't come to the audience on this occasion. Today has been very squeezed, but thank you.
Thanks, Ewan, and to all the distinguished panelists for ending the day with such a rich discussion. It's my pleasure to share a few summary points, and as promised, I will keep these very short. I think there were a few recurring themes. One around the importance of moving from assessment of learning to assessment for learning. But I think critically what I heard was the need to support teachers to make that shift. I think both Dr. Davidson and Dr. Hunsby talked about recognizing that tension between the pressures that we place on teachers to move through the curriculum with pace, but also to do what we know works to support learning in the classroom, support the development of key skills in foundational literacy and numeracy, but also the broader social and emotional learning and well-being of children. We also heard from Mr. Nobuhiro about the JICA School for All programme and the importance of community involvement in developing really sustainable and scalable solutions. I was really struck by the point that Marcia made about really supporting teachers by providing practical examples of how they can assess in the classroom, providing feedback right away so that no child is leaving that classroom with misconceptions in their mind. And of course, the Honourable Minister talked about the need, when we're looking at reforming assessment, we have to look at the system and to create the conditions for success. As she challenged us to ask, we have to have that focus on what are we assessing, why are we assessing, how is it going to happen, do those key stakeholders know what they need to do and how can we support them to deliver. And she also called for the need to focus on the evidence about what's working. And it made me think back to one of the sessions earlier today with UNESCO UIS, calling for us to measure what matters to support learning. And I think that's a really strong theme that's come through today. So they are the final thoughts from today. I know that the buses are leaving for the dinner promptly at 6:45. So thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you at dinner.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you so much, Honourable Minister Vongai, Marcia, and Mr. Kaneda online. And thank you to all of you for sticking with us, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.